So here we are picking it up again with plan risk management. Sometimes I abbreviate it RM. So plan risk management, nothing new under the sun here. It defines how to do risk management for the entire project. And so frankly, you want to begin early in planning and finish early because you're going to use it a lot. And then of course it's iterative. You'll go over and over and over it again. You want to ensure the degree, type, and visibility are proportionate to the risks and the stakeholders. That's why when we do qualitative analysis, we'll actually do a numeric, a subjective rather, probability of impact. It'll be a number, but it's subjective. But it's really meant to prioritize, and then the ones that are lower priority, lower probability, or lower impact, or both, those are going to be on a watch list. And so we're not really going to develop those because it takes a lot of time. I could produce a response to every single risk out there, but boy, the resources that would eat up when there's high likelihood that they will either not occur or the impact is low. So it has your assortment of inputs, tools, and outputs. The charter and the project plan are common. Project documents, in this case, I ask you to think of the stakeholder register because like you get constraints from the stakeholders, you get assumptions from the stakeholders, you get requirements from the stakeholders, you get quality from the stakeholders, quality standards, you're also getting risk. So the stakeholder register, some of the documents I review, and the understanding of their risk attitudes and risk thresholds that we just discovered. Of course, then EEFs and OPAs. For tools, expert judgment, individuals or groups with specialized knowledge, but this time think of experts in risk management, somebody that maybe has that background. Okay, think of that. When it talks about data analysis, the analysis was part of our stakeholder analysis we did in stakeholder management, some time ago. And part of that analysis was to determine their risk appetite, and then of course meetings. Now, your output is great. You have this great big output called the Risk Management Plan, where the remaining risk process plans will now exist or springboard from this. It's not concerned with actual risks yet. Actual risks will be part of the next process called Identify Risks. So it's just how I'm going to do risk management for the project. It's going to include a strategy, a methodology. What are the roles and responsibilities, for example, of the team members of the risk owners, funding for contingency reserves, example, or management reserves, timing, risk categories, etc. And that's going to, frankly, give us the groupings for individual risks. And we're going to use that in a risk breakdown structure, RBS. Which is different from, remember in resource management, we also had an RBS. That was called a resource breakdown structure. This is a risk breakdown structure. And like any other breakdown structure, it's hierarchical. So the outputs I mentioned have risk categories. Those are the groupings. And it can use an RBS, a risk breakdown structure. Again, like any RBS breakdown structure, it's hierarchical. This time it's just representing the sources of risk. And the RBS helps the project team consider the full range of risk sources. Okay? And I give you some examples there. You'd have a risk category with a source, a risk category with a source, and another risk category with a source. Those forming your RBS. You can look on page 406 for further examples. Part of that risk management plan, stakeholder risk appetite, definitions of probability and impact. So your company, your PMO, may have pre-established probability and impact that they want you to use. Check with them. And that's what I mean by definitions. You also may want to define them in advance and put it in the risk management plan based on a conversation with your stakeholders. And then you don't want to discuss reporting formats and tracking. That's your output. Now, that's process one. Process two of risk management is called identify risks. And this is an iterative process. You will spend the whole project looking to identify risks. You never stop doing that. Even though it's a process, you're doing it in the planning process group and under the knowledge area risk management in the process called identify risks. By process, you do it here. But in philosophy, you are always identifying risks. And this involves all the stakeholders, right? Just like a requirement that isn't a true requirement that is not identified early from the stakeholders will be known. It will just become apparent later. The stakeholder will claim it, and it will cost a lot of money to implement. Well, risks unidentified are a problem. So we want to continue to dialogue with stakeholders about that. We want to make them, a couple of keywords, clear and unambiguous in identify risk. Clear and unambiguous. And we want to nominate the risk owners. This will be confirmed later in the next process, but for now you are nominating the owners and identifying the early response. What's my early risk response? What do I think it's going to be? Well, this process, like all others, has inputs, tools, and outputs. The inputs here are many to this. The project plan, I want you to think of, and that's why I put it off on the right, the iron triangle. Remember or we call it the performance measurement baseline, schedule, cost, and scope. So those are 3 of the management plans. In fact, a 4th, which is a requirements management plan. So think of the requirements management plan, cost management plan, schedule management plan. And then whenever I showed this iron triangle, I would have quality at the top. So that is another one. And then the others around it include resource management, procurement agreements, risk management, and project documents. So there are 6 management plans and the PMB all forming what you should look at in the project plan. Those are what I would call the key constraints. The PMB and those management plans. And then you would have agreements, procurement documents. Procurement documents may introduce individual risks, or the procurement document may decrease overall risk by using other sources to identify. And then project documents, EEFs, and OPAs. Now my next is my tools for identify risk. And these are also many. Let's take a quick look at those. Okay. Expert judgment is the first one out the gate. And again, specialized knowledge, groups or individuals. But again, I mentioned, like I did in the last process when we had expert judgment, we're going to think of expert judgment in terms of risk management, not in terms of anything else. After expert judgment, I have a tool called data gathering, okay, which involves a couple of things, brainstorming, checklists, and interviews. Okay, I use interviews on with every key stakeholder before I begin a project. And one of my questions is always about what risks do they see in this project. And one of the other questions I ask that I think I've mentioned before is, what other stakeholders should I talk to? Okay? But brainstorming and checklists are no less important. In fact, I have a project going on right now in web filtering that has 4 phases, and in each phase we have by now identified all the risks and concerns, and we've turned it into a checklist that for each time we implement web filtering at a different drain or egress for the data flow, we are following the checklist, and basically it's become routine now. We have nearly eliminated the risks by following the checklist. Okay, and that's data gathering. Then I'm going to do data analysis. Always, first and foremost, would be root cause analysis, used to discover the causes and develop preventive actions. So we can identify threats by starting with the problem statement, for example, or find out opportunities by drafting a benefit statement. Okay. Data analysis also includes assumptions and constraints analysis. So every project is based on assumptions and constraints, and those were determined through the stakeholders. We said, so we want to explore the validity of the assumptions. Are they true? Can we eliminate them? And then a SWOT analysis. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Some are internal, some are external. We want to leverage strengths, eliminate or mitigate weaknesses, pursue and maximize opportunities, and avoid threats. And of course, you can do document analysis. Interpersonal and team skills is an important tool, as well as prompt lists. I think of PESTLE. That stands, and this is at the strategic level, but political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental issues. So PESTLE is the acronym that stands for those. I would know all that for the test. And there's another one, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And those are starter points for, frankly, more brainstorming under the identify risk tools. And then, of course, you have meetings. Now, in these slides, all I want to say is risk is everywhere and always has been. Whether I can get risk from the past, background information, historical information, lessons learned. OPAs have identified risks and get provided processes to resolve. Stakeholder risk tolerances and thresholds. The EES, for example, the culture has risks. Project Charter identified risks. The list goes on. And even in the processes we've been working with, the schedule has risks. In fact, it's full of risks, probably the most risky item. The network diagram, cost estimates. How good was the estimate? Was the person that did the estimate the one leading the group and the most knowledgeable, etc., etc. Procurement has a way to mitigate and transfer risks, but it comes with its own set of risks depending on which type of procurement you use. Okay. So in identify risks, the goal is to build the risk register. So the risk registers include the list of all the risks. No risks are left out. And I've identified potential risk owners and the potential responses and updated the risk categories. Now I have a risk report and I'm ready to go on and do qualitative, quantitative analysis, plan responses, implement, and monitor risks. Okay. All right, that is it for this lesson. Thank you very much.